November 4?
Election Day.
Okay. How old do you have to become?
18 years old.
18 years old. How old are you?
I was lucky. I was 18 when I first voted.
But did you know the first time presidential election, what year was that?
I don't have any idea.
1789.
Ah.
Even then, they're not allowed women to vote.
Really?
Oh, no. It took 131 years. So that's 1920 first time. It took a long time to changing it.
Hard to believe.
Oh, yes. It's that right now, 21st century, we should not take a long time to change.
Yes, ma'am.
Right?
That's correct.
Yes. And right now, it's 2014, 21st century. A woman can run for president and senator and Congress position. It's time for change. So that's why we're here together.
That's great. And I'd like to introduce our moderator tonight is Margaret Jackson. Margaret Jackson is a business show host for AM 1220 KDOW Business and Finance Radio. She has over 20 years experience in the production arena and is an award-winning corporate producer. She is the owner of Business on the Edge and the president of On the Edge Women in Business Club.
Oh, yes. Also, we have a person who's running for Congress position, Ro Khanna. At the 38 years old, Ro Khanna brings fresh ideas, modern voices, and refreshing new energy to Silicon Valley. Born and raised in Philadelphia to Indian immigrant parents, he relocated to Fremont in 2011, right here. He is an attorney at the major law firm in the Palo Alto, a lecturer at the Stanford, and professor at the Santa Clara University. In 1996, as the college students at the University of Chicago, he volunteered for Mr. Obama's campaign for state senate. In 2009, President Obama appointed him as a Deputy Assistant Secretary in the US Commerce Department. He is endorsed by the San Jose Mercury News and the San Francisco Chronicle. Khanna is also spoken by many Silicon Valley executives, including those from Yahoo, Google, Facebook, and Salesforce. He believes in empowering the younger generation for technology and education. We would like to welcome Mr. Ro Khanna. And now, let's go to the TYK studio.
All right, let's go. Yay!
It's an honor to be here tonight at the forum here. This community forum is an opportunity for you to have your say in the democratic process. And we want to give our candidate an opportunity to win our votes and to hear what he has to say with regards to going to the Congress, going to take on such a difficult task. It is something when someone decides to run for office and to be under the scrutiny that one must take to hold an office, to go through the democratic process and the democracy of this country. So it's an honor to be here with you, candidate Ro Khanna. Please, if you have any questions, at some point we'll give you an opportunity to ask those questions to our candidate. Here are the rules for tonight. For this forum, we will give you 2 minutes, the candidate 2 minutes to open up with his opening statement. You'll have a 2-minute closing statement. Our questions, we do have some questions prepared. You will have 90 seconds to answer those questions just for the sake of time. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to give Ro Khanna an opportunity, candidate Ro Khanna, an opportunity to open up with your opening statement. 2 minutes on the clock, please.
Well, Margaret, thank you very much for hosting. Dr. Kim, thank you for your leadership. You're such a inspiration to not just people in Fremont, but the younger generation around the world, and admire you're doing this. And I know Sarah had been very helpful. I want to thank her. And it's great to see so many friends here like Steve Cho and Anjali and Tom. One of the things that the bio was great. One of the things I actually relocated back to Fremont. I was in the administration, but I was in Fremont before I left for the administration. And I've been living in Warm Springs for many years. And I think that it's so important that Congress get a new perspective in our current mess that we're in. The approval rating of Congress is 9%. They can't get anything done. It's so much bickering and polarization. And I said I want to bring a new approach, a new agenda to Congress. 3 simple points. One, I'm going to work across the aisle. Even though I'm a Democrat, I think we need people who are going to go and work with Republicans to pass legislation and get something done. Meet with the local chambers of commerce, not hold party ahead of country, but put country first. Number 2, I have said I'm not going to take any special interest money. No PAC money, no lobbyist money, no corporate money. All the funding I get is from individuals. We need to get the lobbyists and the political influencers, special interests out of our politics in Washington and have individuals responsible to the community and to individuals. And number 3, I want to focus on job creation. The reality is, we just lost Tesla to Nevada, and California has not created a pro-economic growth, pro-business environment. I tell people in labor unions, I'm very strongly for minimum wage and labor, but you can't be anti-jobs, but pro-business, but anti-jobs.
Thank you, sir. We're going to stick close to the time so we can be judicious of our time. Thank you so much.
Right.
For our first question, tell us what skills, experience, and or background best qualifies you to be a congressman for the 17th Congressional District.
Well, I teach economics. I teach economics at Stanford, and I've written a book about bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States. And as I was saying, you can't be anti-business and pro-jobs. I mean, in this country, in this area, you have to say we want to support small businesses, support entrepreneurs, to be able to create the jobs of the 21st century. I worked when I was at the Commerce Department on bringing a grant back to NUMMI that helped create advanced manufacturing in Fremont. And otherwise, Fremont was going to help make that a residential area. And the grant back then to Mayor Wasserman said, let's keep Fremont a zone for advanced manufacturing. And I've written a book on how to keep America competitive. And I teach economics at Stanford on what we need to do to be competitive for our economy. So if I have the opportunity to serve in Congress, I'm going to have one focus, and that is how do we keep our district economically competitive? How do we keep our country economically competitive in the world?
Thank you. Thank you. You have like 30 seconds. So
that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. Just want to make sure we want to be
tougher
fair with
than
your
Raj
time.
Mathai.
So California is one of the top 10 states that has one of the highest unemployment rates in the country as of August 2014 at 7.4%. What will you do to reduce the rate and get Californians back to work?
Well, first we need to recognize that there are new skills in this new economy. We need to partner with our community colleges and high schools so that we're educating folks for the skills of the 21st century, learning how to code, learning how to operate 3D printers if they're in manufacturing or robotics, learning how to operate CNC machines, understanding digital marketing or web development. So many jobs are going to require technology proficiency in the 21st century, even jobs in law and art. And I have said we need to partner with our community colleges and high schools to have that basic technology proficiency so we have a skilled workforce. The second thing is California needs to realize we're competing in a global economy. We can't burden small businesses with regulations and high taxes and expect them to stay. They're going to leave. They'll leave for Nevada or Texas or Ireland or Singapore. We need to create a pro-business environment in California, in Silicon Valley, to continue to attract the best and brightest to this region so we can have more success stories like Dr. Kim.
Thank you. What do you think are the most important issues facing us, and how would you address those issues?
Well, I think the economy is a huge issue. How do we create opportunity, and particularly income inequality? You know, some people have done very, very well. Others don't have the skills and have been left behind in this economy. I talked to folks, some of them, I talked to a 45-year-old last week who had great skills, but said every job she applied for, there were 150 applications. And we have to figure out how do we get those folks back into the workplace. I have said we need to have tax credits for companies to rehire veterans and those who are middle-aged who may have skills but have been displaced from the job market. I think we need to have a strong social safety net for those who may not have, may be struggling, and make sure that they have job retraining, education credit, so that they can get back into the productive workforce. And I think we need to make sure our young people aren't being burdened with debt. I'm still paying on my student loans, and so many young people I meet are graduating with all this debt, unable to afford a house, unable to live in this community. We have to lower interest rates on student loans, and we have to redo the way we do financial aid.
Thank you. What is the proper role of the federal government concerning education?
Well, they should have a role. They should have a role in making sure our schools are properly funded, to have basic technology and proficiency, to be training our teachers. Teachers ought to be paid better in our country, and we ought to have better teacher preparation in the subjects they're going to teach. And the federal government, I think, traditionally has stayed away from education. But you know what? Our country's competitiveness, our country's greatness is going to depend more upon whether we have an educated next generation than just a strong military. And it's in a national interest to have the federal government support innovative programs in education, in teacher training, in promoting teaching of technology in the classroom. But I also think, of course, we need a lot of local control for schools, and the local school districts need to be innovative and responsive in their communities on how to set the curriculum and how to deal with the unique needs of a particular community.
Thank you. Do you have a plan to attract manufacturing companies to California and specifically to District 17? If so, what is that plan?
Well, I do. I think we need to simplify the permitting process. You shouldn't have, if you're a manufacturer or business, have to go to 40 different regulatory agencies to get permitting or to be able to do something. You know, we almost lost Apple Computers Campus 2. Took them 3 years to get that built. In Texas, it took them 6 months to get their campus built. We need to not lower our standards, but we need to simplify the complex bureaucracy and be welcoming to business in California. We need to invest more heavily in our UCs and community colleges, so we're training people so that they have the skills that employers need in coding and programming and advanced manufacturing. Right now there's a skills shortage. We don't have enough people in the area who have the credentials and skills to do the jobs in advanced manufacturing. And then finally, we need to have the right type of tax policy. We can't incentivize companies to push their money offshore. We got to get them to bring that money back to the United States.
Thank you, sir. Do you support limits on campaign contributions?
Well, I do. I have taken no money from political action committees, no money from lobbyists. I have said, and that's very different than my opponent, Mike Hondo is a nice guy, but a lot of his money comes from Washington lobbyists and special interests. I think we ought to have only money given by individuals. Currently, the caps are probably higher than I think they should be ideally. I would lower the caps. I'd say let's have the caps lowered, but the Supreme Court, that's for the Supreme Court to decide.
Thank you, sir. What action would you recommend to address the problem of money, its growing influence in politics?
One, I think everyone should take the pledges I did. I've said I'm not going to take any special interest money, not going to take a single special interest junket if I get to Congress. I'm not going to vote for any pay increases, not going to take the congressional pensions. You know, you get congressional pension after 5 years in Congress. 5 years you get pension after you turn 62 for the rest of your life. No other job does that. We need members of Congress to start living like everyone else. And I've pledged to do that. And I hope everyone running for Congress takes those simple pledges so that they will live like the people they represent. And that will get some of the entrenchment out of our politics.
Thank you, sir. Women's rights. Women's rights. Protecting women's rights, according to your website, ensure fairness in the workplace, women must be assured equal pay for equal work, and we need to implement better support systems to help women climb the corporate ladder and establish themselves in STEM fields. The question is, what specific steps will you take to implement equal pay and creating opportunities for women to be established within the STEM field without repercussion from their male counterparts that tend to roadblock women's advancement in these areas?
It's a great question. One, I think we need to have equal work for equal pay. I would support that legislation in the United States Congress that many oppose. Two, we need child care tax credits. A lot of women have to balance and they don't between family and work. And we need companies to be providing child care and tax credits to companies that provide good child care so that women don't have to make that choice. Third, we need paid parental leave in this country. Women shouldn't be the only have the only child rearing responsibility. We need men and women to have it. That means paid parental leave, not just paid maternity leave. And maternity leave in this country is still considered a disability. We need to move to where it's a paid parental leave. You know, I look forward to having a conversation with my Republican colleagues about that and saying, you know, you believe in family values. Well, one of the biggest things you can do for family values is making sure the father and mother are with their kid at a young age and have time off to be able to do that. So these are some of the broader policies that I think will make our workplace more friendly for women to be in leadership.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to take a moment right now to see if we have any questions from the audience, and we do. Is this microphone for audience questions? Could we have someone grab the microphone, please?
Mr. Khanna, can you hear me?
I can.
Well, welcome to California. I'm previously from Philadelphia myself. So
Oh, great.
City of brotherly love.
You're an Eagles fan?
Show you a little love right now. It seems like as if in our country, every once in a while, when we have emergencies, that the politicians do a knee-jerk reaction and pass something. In World War II, we took American citizens and put them in internment camps. After 9/11, we made this big Homeland Security Patriot Act, and we started eroding on the Constitution as far as I'm concerned. That's near and dear to my heart. So my question to you is, what action will you take to ensure transparency of federal agencies collecting private citizen data without court oversight? In other words, drone surveillance, FBI letters demanding citizens' data without establishing probable cause.
Well, Harrison, I appreciate the question, and it's close to my heart. I have come out with an Internet Bill of Rights. I criticized the president, even though I served in his administration, for the NSA program. And the mass surveillance on private citizens, I thought, was unconstitutional. And we needed Congress to take a much stronger stand against the NSA and some of the mass surveillance that took place in this administration. In my Internet Bill of Rights, I have proposed that people will be free from warrantless searches and have a right to privacy in their data. They should have a right to privacy and understanding of the use and scope of that data, even against private companies. So the Internet Bill of Rights applies not just to government overreach, but also to Facebook or Google or private companies overreaching. I have said that we need net neutrality, so everyone has equal access to an open and free internet. I am very concerned about drone surveillance and have said that we need to stand up to make sure that that isn't violating the Fourth Amendment and persons' privacy rights. So if you go to my website on the Internet Bill of Rights, it's one of the only candidates in the country pushing a comprehensive position, and someone from Silicon Valley ought to be standing up for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Can I do a follow-up? As an adjunct to that, the second part of the question was that there seems to be a trend in the states right now where a lot of the local police forces are beginning to use SWAT tactics. And I'm not against SWAT tactics, so don't get me wrong on that. But they're using SWAT tactics on crimes that are nonviolent, creating a very volatile environment. And in some cases, people have been killed, hurt, or injured. What do you think you can do about that at the national level?
Well, we need to take very strong action, of course, against police brutality, police excessive force. I mean, the events in Ferguson highlighted that we have a long way to go. But this is something that our country has been grappling with since its founding. Nathaniel Hawthorne in the Scarlet Letter said, America has a persecuting spirit. And my judge, who I worked for, said, one of the worst things that could happen to you in this country is getting on the other side of the law. And sometimes I think we lose a sense of empathy and forgiveness for how difficult it is if you get on the other side of the law. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be tough on crime, but when we have the largest incarceration rate in the industrialized world, when we're building more prisons than schools, we have to look in the mirror and say, how are we going to educate the next generation, have programs of rehabilitation, so that we can be a civilized society that doesn't have the rates of incarceration and excessive incidents of crime that we do.
Thank you. Do we have any other audience questions at this time? Yes.
Could I ask you, what are your thoughts on Prop 46 and the possible violations of HIPAA, and how that's going to affect, what are your thoughts on how it's going to affect the public if it passes?
Sure. Now this is the caps, the medical malpractice cap, or the insurance one.
This is talking about the release of data.
Right.
In the event, of physicians or a physician being drunk on the job, or
right.
somebody being arrested and
on the medical malpractice. But it also goes to the caps, opening the caps. But I am concerned about making sure that the medical records are protected. And I don't think that those records should be released without a patient's consent. And the violations that have taken place, electronic medical records I think are very important because they improve coordination, they help efficiency, but there is this potential for abuse, and I would not support the release of those without a patient's consent. And so, and I also think we have to be very mindful about the costs on the healthcare system and not adding to those costs by allowing for unlimited lawsuits. There should be an evidence-free zone where if physicians follow certain guidelines, they have a safe harbor from lawsuits.
Thank you, sir. Any more audience questions? We'll take one more at this time.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Khanna. This is Serena. Okay. More? One more time? Okay. Nice to meet you, Mr. Ro Khanna. Yes. I have a question about that education. You mentioned about, education is very important, right? And I think, we are paying our tax more and more every year. But our education money is getting lower. And then also, as you mentioned, we're spending more money for prison, not education.
Right.
Is there any plan?
Well, one, I think the federal government has all these unfunded mandates for special needs education. So we require school districts to do all these things without funding it. If the federal government's going to require something, they ought to fund it. And that will alleviate local school districts to use more state and local money on other programs. And I think, so the federal government has to do its part in funding things that it mandates. The second thing is that we need to prioritize education. A lot of people who have kids in schools aren't voting. We need to make sure that folks who have an interest in supporting education are going out, are voting, are being active in the community, so that that money, so that the money for increased school infrastructure passes, so we can build more schools, and so we can fully support local education.
How about the, raising salary for teacher to hire better, teacher?
I support that. I support it with mix of accountability. I would pay teachers more, treat them with more respect, invest more in their preparation and credentialing, and then have accountability of peer review and other things so you can remove teachers who are ineffective. So a combination of paying them more, having them more trained and credentialed, but then having accountability.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
What we're going to do at this time, we're going to go back to some of the questions that we're giving here, and then we'll switch back to our questions to the audience. But we're going to go back to some of the questions here so we can try to accommodate everyone. If you are elected to office, what will you do to eliminate predatory lending by banks to small business owners?
Well, we talked about this before, Margaret, and predatory lending is a huge issue because it hurts small businesses. If the banks can be bailed out on Wall Street at 2%, there's no excuse for requiring or allowing banks to be predatory lending to small businesses and entrepreneurs. And I would pass legislation, work to pass legislation against that. Any bank that has received any assistance from the federal government should not be allowed to engage in predatory lending.
Thank you, sir. And this question is again with regards to small businesses. According to the Small Business Administration, there are 10 to 12% of small businesses birthed each year and 10 to 12% of small business deaths each year. That's about 680,000 plus small businesses across the country.
Right.
What will you do to minimize small business deaths if you are elected to Congress?
Small business deaths?
Yes.
Well, small business, being an entrepreneur, starting a business is a very tough thing. It's like being in a political campaign. You know, the odds are stacked against you. I don't, and I think we have to be, let me digress a little bit. One of the things I teach at Stanford, and you get the most brilliant kids. But one of the things that I've noticed about this generation, they're not used to failing. They've succeeded in everything. You give them an A- and they get all upset. And the real world, I tell them, is very tough. No one tells you if you do, after the debate I had with Mike Honda, all you get some good, and then everyone has some criticism. No one, it's a tough, competitive world. So one, we have to educate and raise, and I know Dr. Kim does this, the next generation to say, we're living in a tough world. Starting a small business is going to be tough. But that's what built this country: rugged individualism, hard work, risk-taking. And then the question is, well, how do you make that easier? Well, you give people access to capital. You make sure that they have opportunities to increase and learn how to export. You make sure they have opportunities to learn how to be an entrepreneur. But ultimately, no one can teach you how to succeed in a small business. You have to have that determination, and that's what we need to inculcate in the younger generation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Small Bay Area manufacturing tech companies would like to expand quicker. However, they are frustrated with the bureaucracy of the system and do not feel as if there are enough tax incentives for them to expand comfortably. As a result, that stagnates them rather than scaling their business. What will you do to eliminate the bureaucracy of the system and improve tax incentives for them to hire more people and scale their manufacturing technology companies?
Well, we live in a competitive world. These companies have the choice. Do they go to Ireland? Do they go to Singapore? Do they set up shop in Texas? And for the longest time, you have politicians kind of comment and say, well, Benedict Arnold, CEO, shouldn't ship jobs overseas. But that's just rhetoric. The reality is companies are going to look at where their economic incentives are aligned, and they're going to make decisions based on that. So we have to make a competitive tax code, not because I care about the top few percent making more money, because I care about incentivizing companies to stay in the Bay Area. And that's why I've proposed that we reform our corporate tax code so that you don't have a sense where one company like GE is paying 0% and yet other companies are paying 30-some%. Let's have an effective, fair tax where everyone is paying a certain amount, but it's competitive. Let's give companies deductions if they're expanding in building manufacturing capacity or manufacturing plants. Let's incentivize them to bring that money home if they're investing in the United States and investing in expanding their facilities. We need pro-economic growth policies.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. We are now, at this time, we're going to take more questions from the audience.
Hello, Mr. Khanna. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And I have two questions. First question will be is regarding the border security and also illegal aliens and also all the tax money that is, my understanding, lots of tax money is spent for the illegals, healthcare and their expenses, living costs and so forth. So I'd like your opinion.
Well, we're a nation of immigrants, but we're also a nation of laws. And those are the two founding principles of our country. My parents immigrated in the 1960s. But we want to encourage people to come here, but to come here through the legal process, because that is what makes America great. You should aspire to come to the United States. Everyone wants to come, but through the legal process. The question then is, well, what do we do with folks who are here who are undocumented? For the dreamers, I think it's a no-brainer. We need to give them citizenship. I mean, if your parents came here, you were 2 years old, 4 years old, you've been through the Fremont schools or colleges, and then you're applying for a job, and you find out, well, you weren't born in the United States, there's no reason to treat someone like that differently. They ought to be a citizen. They ought to be able to work and contribute. For those who are undocumented, I think we need a path to legalization so that they are part of the system, so that they're not in the shadows of the system. And we have to figure out through a comprehensive approach how we tighten our border security, but at the same time have a path to citizenship for those who may be undocumented.
What about the issues that it's been addressing on the broadcast of all this South Americans, the teenagers, and without the parenting's guidance, and they're
Right.
immigrants. Lots of them are flooded through buses and so forth. Our government didn't seems like they took care of that matters. How would you handle that kind of a program?
It's a humanitarian crisis. I mean, your heart breaks for those kids. But the question is, what should we do? My view is that we need to work with Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador to reunite those kids with their parents and their families, because having kids here without families is not healthy, and incentivizing
Thank you, sir.
kids to take those
Thank you.
treacherous journeys is not right.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. When the time runs out, we must stop the clock.
Thank you.
So if you can reset the clock, appreciate it. Thank you. And we'll take another audience question. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Holly, and it's very nice to meet you, sir.
Hi, Holly.
I have a question about student loans. You mentioned at 38 you're still paying back your student loans. I know that's going to be a real burden for college graduates today. What would you do to reform the student loan program?
It's a great question, and the challenge is the interest rates are so high, 8% interest rate. I would have students get interest rates at 2%, the same we lend to the banks. Second, the way we do financial aid, we require a student to disclose their parents' home value in 401k plan. Now, it's crazy to expect parents to sell their house to pay for a kid's college education or bankrupt their retirement to pay for their college education. So that shouldn't count towards their ability to pay when calculating financial aid. And I've proposed changing our FAFSA laws so that we don't include a parent's home value or 401k. Finally, I think we need to encourage open online courses, massive open online courses. That will lessen the amount of time that kids need to spend at a traditional university, and will hopefully decrease the tuition costs.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Khanna, let's talk a little bit about foreign affairs. We've
Yes.
had a lot about the local economy.
Right.
There's a magazine, The Economist, that had on the front page, "What would America fight for?" When you go to Congress, you'll be asked, do we have several conflicts going around this world? What should America fight for? What would you authorize our soldiers to fight for?
Well, it's a very profound question, and of course, from a philosophical perspective, we should fight for democracy and human rights and standing up for religious tolerance, which is why I would support the airstrikes on ISIS, which had shown a total contempt for women's rights, beheading of journalists. But what I don't agree with is the president bypassing Congress. I mean, Congress did not have an up or down vote on the authorization of force. I believe the Constitution gives Congress the decision-making power of whether to go to war or not. And if I were in Congress, I would have invoked the War Powers Act, where 30% of members of Congress can ask the president to require an up or down vote on the vote of force. I would have voted for the authorization. The reason Congress didn't want to vote is none of them want to go on the record. They don't want to take a vote about whether to support the airstrike or not because it's controversial and they don't want to be on the wrong side. But when you go to Congress, your job is to cast votes on these tough decisions. And one of the things I will do is vote my conscience. And people may not disagree with me always, but they'll know that I'm going to vote what I think is right and not duck tough decisions and stand up to make those hard calls of war and peace in the United States Congress.
Thank you.
Mr. Khanna, I have one more question, so I came back.
They let you, huh?
Yeah, I came from Korea
Yeah.
and became an American citizen now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I think, Mr. Honda, he disagreed about the FTA, which is free trading agreement between America and Korea.
Right.
You think that is, it helps American economy or, not helping?
Well, I have a disagreement with Congressman Honda. He had opposed the trade agreement with Korea on the free trade agreement. I support the trade agreement with Korea. The reason I support it is I think trade, by and large, with Korea helps America's economy. We sell a lot of automobiles to Korea. It helps create jobs in the automobile sector. It helps American export. We want to partner in economic cooperation with the world, and we outcompete them through innovation and hard work and creativity and merit, not by building walls of protectionism. And my Congress position on that, I think, is protectionist. It's the old way of doing things. It's not the 21st century world in a global economy.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. We are going to go back to some more of the questions here. We'll get to you. Everyone, get an opportunity. We're going to do our best to give everyone an opportunity. Candidate Khanna, oh, that's funny. Candidate Khanna, you speak a lot about working across the aisle if you get to Congress. Now, if you are attempting to do that and the other side of the aisle does not want to work with you, how will you address that scenario, since our president has tried to do that with his time in office and has not been able to do it successfully to date? So what would you do differently?
Well, I would look for areas where you can work across the aisle. I mean, the president, I think, has tried to do it on very, very big issues of health care and Social Security, but I think we have to take baby steps. Who can be opposed to teaching coding in the classroom in the 21st century? Who could be opposed to simplifying regulations to keep manufacturing in the United States? Who could be opposed to tax reform that makes a more corporate competitive tax code? There have been examples of Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan and a lot of leaders who have successfully worked across the aisle. And the way I've campaigned, I have worked with Republicans and Democrats and independents, and that's the attitude I will take to Congress. There are 435 members there, and I'm sure one or two of the Republicans will be willing to work with me.
Thank you, sir. How will you address gun laws to help support or to keep our schools safe from incidents like the Sandy Hook incident? What will you do to help keep our children safe?
Well, it's a huge issue, and you can support the Second Amendment and still believe that we need basic safety. Every time you go board an airplane, you have to go through a metal detector, and people don't view that as an invasion of privacy. They view that as something that keeps us safe. I don't think anyone would object to having to go through a metal detector. Similarly, if you're a gun owner, I think submitting to basic background checks, universal background checks, to make sure guns aren't getting in the hands of people who have mental health issues or who are using them improperly, is not taking away the Second Amendment, but is having basic safety to make sure that things like Newton don't happen. And we have to learn how to talk about these issues in a way that's unifying. I think I worked in the South for a year. I had worked for a judge who had guns all over his chamber, and it was a cultural issue. And what we have to show people is we respect cultural tradition. We aren't going after the Second Amendment, but the horrific incidents of violence require solutions such as universal background checks and not having magazine clips. And I think I will bring a more reasoned perspective to that than may be able to get bipartisan support.
Thank you, sir. Now, we have about 20 minutes before this forum ends. If you do have a question, please. So let's, Dr. Kim has a question. So
Go ahead, you first.
I'm back again, brother. The second part of this question here is in reference to the amount of money we've been spending over the past, I guess, 20 or 25 years on the so-called fighting illegal drugs. And we've come full circle, and a lot of the issues we have along our southern borders has to do with drugs. And so it ties back into the same thing about using military personnel on our borders. Just want to know what you think about that. And secondly, is it with a number of states that have already passed laws to use medicinal marijuana, as well as some states have passed laws to use it as recreational. When will the states and the federal level be in line with each other? And how do you feel about it?
Well, I'm for the decriminalization and legalization of marijuana. I don't think that putting people in prison or using law enforcement resources to go after that is a wise use of our country's resources. I also think the drug war has been, by and large, a failed effort. We have not stemmed the addiction to drugs or the supply of drugs. We've spent a lot of money trying to fight it. And we need a different approach, one based more on education and making sure that people have and dealing with the demand side of the equation instead of trying to think we can magically solve the supply side. So I definitely think we need to relook at our drug policies in this country and acknowledge what hasn't worked.
Thank you.
thank you, sir. We have a question from Dr. Kim. Yes.
I can ask a question. Yeah. Okay, give a big hand, everybody. You've been sitting there for hours. You know, I have a question. Is two. One is right now, lately, is I don't know about any of you, but me is a big time concern Ebola disease. As in, you know that in America, the person who died, I believe yesterday. But just in case, I do not understand why we are not doing something. You know, people come from whatever. So I don't know about you. You do not have a concern. I have a concern that Ebola will, before you know, it was going to be wiped. It doesn't matter what you have, a success and happiness when the disease come get you. So what is your plan? What will you suggest? That's one question. Next is drought, global warming and drought, environmental. And I have a big time concern about that too, because California, about a month ago, I traveled and the northern and the California, and Trinity Lake is one of the largest lake in California. Is completely dry. There's no lake. There's no water. But we have to think about it. What is your suggestion? What is your idea to recommend it
Right.
about well-being? Thank you.
Great question.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, Ebola is a huge potential endemic, and we need to work to recognize that a global health challenge in any part of the world is now can affect us, and it's not that we live in a disconnected world, and we should work with the World Health Organization and CDC to lead to invest in helping contain Ebola where it has broken out, and put the resources to fight that disease because it's in our self-interest. We also should take common sense measures that if planes or people are coming from areas that have high incidence of Ebola, that we either quarantine or make sure that we're checking them so that they aren't coming into the United States and bringing disease into the United States. That's not discriminating against people anywhere. It's just being prudent to make sure that we do whatever we can to stop that from coming into the United States, while at the same time investing very, very heavily and strongly as part of a community of nations in dealing with solving Ebola and that public health crisis. The drought, there's a Stanford study that shows that the increased atmospheric pressure off the coast of the Pacific Ocean, caused largely by CO2 emissions, is what has prevented the storms from coming into California and rain, and in part be linked to droughts. Now, that's not a democratic position. That's a science.
Let me just stop you for a moment. Was that 2 questions for the time? Okay, so let's start the clock so he can finish that question. Okay, 2 questions.
That's a science perspective. I mean, these are scientists at Stanford. So we need to deal with global warming to deal with things like climate change and the drought, and that means alternative energy. It means making sure we have energy conservation. It means making sure that we are supporting carbon plants, coal plants that don't have large carbon emissions. And we also need to have strategies for our water. I mean, the Delta River system, 50% of the Bay Area's water comes from that. And we need to make sure that the salmon and the Delta smelt that we have strategies to conserve them, not because it's good for the fish, but because it's good for those ecosystems, so we still get water in the Bay Area. And making sure that whatever federal bill we have has energy conservation, water recycling as part of a strategy to have a stable water supply for Silicon Valley.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We're going to go to audience questions.
Thank you. You mentioned the problem with prison spending being higher than education spending. And it's especially a problem in minority communities where sometimes people are disenfranchised even for non-violent offenses. And so I was curious, what kind of changes would you like to see to the prison system?
Yeah, no, I think the way we treat our prisons and and when we will be judged historically, it'll be one of those things that we're not judged well for. Because we lock people up and then they become unproductive, and then when we release them, they often resort back to crime. And I don't think one person can go to Congress and change this. It has to be a broader conversation in society about how we make sure that the way we're educating and treating prisoners and providing them with opportunities make them productive members of society. There's a great nonprofit called Last Mile where a number of tech leaders actually have gone into some of the prisons with violent offenders and started to give them basic skills in technology and other areas, making them employable. The biggest difference between someone and I who has hope and those who don't is the ability to visualize the future. You say, I can visualize. I'll either win or lose in November, but there's hope. I can win and be a member of Congress. The people who are in prison, often the biggest challenge is they don't have anything to live for. There's no hope. We have to figure out how do we create hope in these populations and skills so that we give them a reason to be productive members of society.
Thank you, sir. Any more audience questions?
I have one more. Good time
Number
to talk
3.
about this kind of stuff. The next part of it is because we have so many of our young that's getting in trouble, either through crime, involved drugs, and what have you. What would you do to create a discussion in D.C. about the possibility of having all young men and women that turn 18 perform some type of military or government service for a couple of years with the idea that may pay for a couple of years of college for them? This is one of the greatest countries in the world, and I still cannot figure out why, if you don't have money, you can't go to college. That doesn't make sense.
I appreciate that, sir, and I appreciate, of course, your service to our country. I don't know if I would make it national service mandatory, but I would certainly try to do something which made a national service tied to going to college, where if you spent 2 years or 3 years serving the country, of course we have the GI Bill, but maybe expanding that and expanding it to civilian service, then you would be able to, the government would pay for your college. And I do think we need, when I go to the high schools in this district, and you say, I often ask kids, I said, do you want to become President of the United States or Sheryl Sandberg or Steve Jobs? Almost 90% will say Sheryl Sandberg or Steve Jobs. We're raising a generation of folks who are entrepreneurial, get private sector, but we've lost a sense of public spiritedness in this country. And certainly no one would want to go become a member of Congress or city council or mayor. But the challenge is we're going to need that in the next generation. We're going to need a generation of people who are going to get up and answer the call to service for their communities. And so if there is a program for 2 years or other things, whatever we can do to help young folks develop that passion for something public-spirited, I think is absolutely critical.
Thank you, sir. We have about 8 minutes before we get to the closing statements of candidate Khanna, so I'm going to go to another question that we were given this evening by one of the attendees here tonight. What economics theories will you advocate for, and how will this help our district?
Well, I'm for an economic theory that creates jobs. My view is you have to be for entrepreneurs, for innovation, for small business. You do that by having the right type of tax incentives and not overburdening small businesses, entrepreneurs with taxes. You do that by simplifying regulations and not overburdening small businesses with extraordinary bureaucracy. And you do that by investing in the right type of job training in high schools, community colleges, and worker retraining so you have a skilled workforce. And then that's, I think, the basic function of a government. And then you let the entrepreneurs and small businesses create economic growth and help create jobs. And that is, I don't think the successful public-private partnerships have been what's built America. I don't think we're an ideological nation. We never veer towards free market absolutism or socialism. In this country, we do what works. And the problem with Congress is it's become too ideological. I think we need to get it back to pragmatic public-private partnerships that are going to help small business and economy and entrepreneurs create jobs.
Thank you, sir. We have one more audience question. We'll take that, and then maybe
Hello?
one more question.
Hello.
How you doing, sir?
Good.
What I'd like to find out is what is your stance on minimum wage? Is it practical? Is it pro-business?
Both Mike Khanna and I support an increase in the minimum wage, and the reason I support it is because I think it's important to have work pay. I rather that we incentivize work and you make more money than going on welfare or not being in work than having someone make a wage and have that be less than what welfare or unemployment would pay. So in my judgment, paying a decent minimum wage not only allows people to live in a community that's expensive, but also incentivizes people to work. That said, there's no doubt that it poses a challenge for some small businesses and poses costs for them. And that's why I think it has to be part of a broader agenda to simplify regulations, to maybe provide tax incentives for small businesses to offset that, so that it's society as a large that's bearing that and not just disproportionately entrepreneurs or small businesses.
Thank you, sir. Do we have one more question from the audience?
I think I'll differ from the conventional question. Just a quick question. From a dashboard perspective, where do you see the race right now between yourself and Mike Honda? Do you have some numbers that your staff have put together between the time frame from now to November 4th in terms of what are the numbers looking like? The last election we did, I think you were successful against Vanilla Singh and some of the other ones, but how far is the gap are you looking at to close against Mike Honda so we could get you into Congress?
Right, I appreciate that. Well, we had a very good debate, and the polling has really tightened after the debate. I'd say we're still the underdog because Mike Honda has been there 14 years, and as I mentioned in the debate, the turnover rate in the United States Congress is 4%, less than European monarchies. European monarchies turn over at a faster rate. I'm not kidding. So what we're trying is almost a revolution in a way. But the gap is closed. We are within 5 or 6 points. I started out at 3%. Mike Honda was at 75%. People said, "You're crazy for doing this. Why are you doing this?" I said, "No, I know that I'm running on the right vision, the right policies, and this is a very smart, educated district." And I'm told that there's this thing called the Dr. Kim bump. And when you come here and do a forum, you move up 5 points in the polls. So I'm counting on that.
Thank you, sir. You finished it. You finished? Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the audience? I will take one more. We have a little bit of time.
One more question.
Okay, I have one more question, okay? You hinted at something which I'm curious about, okay? Or do you support term limits? Term limits in legislature, term limits in judicial, that would open it up, open up the process.
I personally think 12 terms, 12 years as a House member, 2 terms as a senator is a reasonable amount. Thomas Jefferson said that, had this radical idea that members of Congress should live under the laws that they pass. And the idea was, the idea was that you go there, you contribute, you come back, and you go back to your business, or you go back to teaching. We've gotten so far away from some of the very basic founding principles of this country. I forget who said it, but one of the most brilliant comments that astute observations is someone said, what is the problem with America? And this gentleman said, problem with America is that it needs to be more like America. We have gotten so far away from the founding principles that gave birth to American democracy. Citizen legislators going there to make a difference, coming back to their communities, not beholding to special interest or party. And from this very unique district, I want to try to take that philosophy to Congress, be a little bit of a disruptive force, shake things up, and really try to return us to those basic founding principles.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. I have one question. So I'm going to ask my question. And then we're going to do the closing statements. The University of Maine is testing wind turbines to provide renewable energy to our country. And so this is the mad race in terms of new energy, renewable energy. It's going to radically change how we live in this country. Do you have any policies or thoughts with regards to renewable energy? And do you see in the future, foreseeable future, that California would start testing wind turbines here in the Pacific?
I hope so. I mean, my view on alternative energy is we have to do everything. We have to try wind, we have to try solar, we should try nuclear as long as it's safe with the integral fast reactor and spent fuel. We should try geothermal. We can't afford to put all our eggs in one basket. Right now, 80 to 82% of our energy comes from oil and coal, and we need to diversify that. And I think having tax credits to support wind energy, wind turbines, to support solar development, to support nuclear energy, are all necessary to have a stable energy supply that also isn't emitting more CO2 emissions and doing harm to our planet.
Thank you, sir. And at this time, it's time. We have to close it out. That's moderating. That's you asked
I
me to
have a very
moderate.
important question to ask.
It's okay. So that's it. So you're having me break the moderation rules.
Sorry.
Last question.
Thank you. Couple of quick questions. The first question will be about your statement that you are not interested in taking any special donations for your fundraising. It seems like the presidential candidates or presidents, the cabinets, are doing a constant fundraising when they come to California. Recently there was one, and I was informed that President Obama will be here in town for the fundraising. What's your position on that? Second question will be...
One question, please. One question. We have to close it out. One question.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, fundraising is a challenge of modern day politics, and the reason you have to raise money is because people aren't paying attention. They don't come to forums. They aren't reading the newspapers. They aren't watching the evening news. So you have to raise money to bombard them with mailers, because that's or TV ads, because that's the only thing that gets people's attention. So I don't think the blame lies just with the politicians. I think the blame for more money in politics lies in part with a too apathetic citizenry. And you know, politicians will never criticize the voters, but we do need to encourage more civic activism in our society. And one of the things I'm so proud of is having 400 high school students knocking on doors, getting involved, taking an interest in their democracy, so that we can increase the citizen participation. If we do that, and if we have vehicles like Facebook and more forums and more debates, you'll automatically lessen the need for money in a democracy.
Thank you, sir. And at this time, we will take your 2-minute closing statement. Can you set the clock for 2 minutes, please?
Well, Margaret, I appreciate the opportunity and your moderating it. And Dr. Kim, thank you so much for doing this public service and inviting me here. This is how I think elections should be fought. People going in front of their constituents, taking questions, answering the tough things that are on people's minds. And it's been such an engaged audience, and I really appreciate it and have enjoyed this. Our challenge is how do we get this spirit, this conversation across the district? I think the one difference with Mike Khanna and me, and I respect his public service, is he hasn't been willing to do more debates. He hasn't been willing to do town halls. And I think that's exactly what's wrong with our democracy. We need someone who's going to do town hall meetings, who's going to answer the questions from citizens, who is going to be engaged. We are running to try to bring change to Congress, to try to outline a new bipartisan vision for getting things done across party lines. But to do that, I need each of your help. If you liked what you heard today, please post on Facebook, like our page on Facebook, Ro Khanna USA. Share our website, rokhanna.com, with all your friends and neighbors in Fremont and throughout the district. Talk to your neighbors, and whether you say vote for me or not, obviously I hope they vote for me, but at the very least, ask them to go to my website and Mike Honda's website and cast an informed vote. I am convinced that from this very unique district, the heart of innovation, the heart of Silicon Valley, with people from around the world, from Korea and India and China and all over the world, we can set an example for leadership in the United States Congress, for leadership in the global economy. I need your help to be able to do that, and I hope to be your representative. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is a close again. Do not forget, November 4th is your voting time. That it is you deliver your voices. I'd like to really thank Margaret Jackson, and I'd like to thank Ro Khanna. Thank you very much. And please beware, be happy, celebrate every living breath as this is your last breath. Yeah!
Hey, okay.
Woo!